So a super wide-ranging background that includes writing for comic books, animation, radio, theater, TV, and of course, games. We also have Dr. Kieran Hicks here today. He's a lecturer at the University of London, teaches on several games-related programs. His research has explored games from a variety of user-based and design-based lenses. Much of this has explored games for good, so using games as a tool to engage groups in beneficial activities like exergaming. And he's currently trailblazing research into juiciness, an industry term used to describe visual embellishments that provide the pleasing and appealing qualities of games. We also have here today Dr. Graham McAllister, who's the founder of Player Research, a leading UX research and playtesting company for the games industry worldwide. That's been acquired, and he's since moved on to found TeamSync, a process for checking if games align on a vision for their game, if teams rather align on a vision for their game. Extensive background in UX design, regularly speaking at events like GDC Europe and Reboot Develop, and also has an extensive academic publication history, having previously been a lecturer at Queen's University Belfast and the University of Sussex. We also have Sebastian Deterding, a professor, designer, and researcher working on playful, gameful, and engaging experiences for human flourishing. Frequent speaker at venues like UX London, GDC, Google, Microsoft Research, has been featured on TED. Alongside his leading research on gameful design, he also works as a design consultant with clients like the BBC, BMW, and Greenpeace. And finally, here we have Alex Whittaker, who completed a BSc in genetics at UCL, then moving on to bioinformatics with Cancer Research UK and GlaxoSmithKline. He then followed that up with an MSc in AI at QMUL in 1998, and has worked in the games industry with Sony Psygnosis on PlayStation titles and several other developers, including a significant amount of time with Eidos on the Championship Manager franchise. So thanks all for coming. Really excited to have all of you, and to sort of frame the discussion that we're going to be having about what games user research looks like in academia versus industry. I first want to ask you all, what is games user research? How would you define games user research? And maybe I'll throw that one to Leah first. Or if someone else wants to, hire her, I'm sorry.
I was making that face because I'm the one that uses it, so I know what I want. But I wonder that someone like Graham, who sort of designs it, or would probably be a better place to start.
Thanks, Leah, for passing that straight under my lap. But oh my goodness, I'm not keen on definitions, but I guess what is games user research? I guess it's the branch of science that the game industry uses to help improve or assess the player experience. Now, whether the game industry does that or not is another question, but so it's the use of these methods that are kind of informed by academia, but modified, I would say, somewhat, to try and assess the designs that the industry comes up with. I'm going to stop there. It's already too fuzzy, so.
That works for me. Anyone disagree with that, or are we happy to sort of use that as our working definition for the rest of this discussion?
I'm happy to work with that, and behind the kind of player experience, add player behavior as well. Right? We're not necessarily always just interested in how they feel or think, but also just what they do or don't do.
I think it's worth saying that the industry's kind of interested in the answers and generally goes through the process of asking those questions, but they tend to do it at the very end of the development process. It's a bit pointless, really, but it's usually used to direct marketing rather than games development.
Just as a quick aside, I should have mentioned, thanks for the intro, Nick, but that's one of the reasons why I've kind of left games user research to a certain extent, is for the reason that I think it was Alex just said that if you actually want to have an effect on the game that emerges, I probably don't think that games user research is the way to do it. That's maybe a separate talk, by the way.
We'll see how much of that we can fold in. But that leads nicely into my next question, which maybe I think Alex has some strong thoughts on this. So what would you say is the goal of games user research in industry? And maybe there might be a gap between the stated goal and what it actually accomplishes.
Well, definitely that. I mean, the primary use right now in the industry is to monetize your audience. That's why data scientists are, very sought after and well paid within the games industry. It's basically games which are either free to play, have got microtransactions, maybe loot boxes, that kind of gambling kind of or sub gambling kind of process. It's just a question of trying to wring a few more cents out of your audience per user. I think that the mechanism I mentioned before is that happens so late in the game is often when games companies not super confident about who their audience is. So largely they've made a game, but then they might put it out to a small selected audience and sort of see what they feel about it and how interested they are in it as well. I think telemetry is a big side of this as well, and is increasingly coming into games where effectively you're measuring kind of engagement with the audience, but it's only really useful in things like MMOs or games where the game is still under active development and maybe they're looking to tweak bits of it. I'd say those are the areas where the industry uses it in the main.
Can I be the dumb one on the panel, so that to make this feel accessible?
I doubt it.
No, honestly, listen, I'm filling that seat. But when you say things like telemetry and MMO, do you mind to just
I'm sorry. Yes. So MMO, massively multiplayer online games, experiences like Warhammer or Guild Wars or those kind of Warcraft, I should say, so, or Guild Wars, those kind of games where there is a kind of an active development or at least curation of the audience, so that they're trying to give them kind of what they want. And telemetry is analytics is literally where you're taking measurements of the game all the time and usually pushing it up into the cloud so that you can apply kind of statistics to kind of understand or try and understand your audience.
Thanks.
So does that align with, I think almost everyone here has at least some industry experience. So does that align with others' experiences for what games user research has sought after in their work?
I think we certainly sought after an attempt to improve to understand who our audience was in an attempt to then create a better product for them. And that was what we sought to do. I don't know whether or not we were able to do that, but when we so working in the narrative department, what we wanted with a narrative-led game, what we wanted to do is understand where the value lay for the players and how they felt and things like that, so that we were able to then craft things better. And we definitely did seek to do that. I think Alex's summary of what it is that the industry uses that research for is probably a better idea of what happened at the end. But I think there was, I don't know that it's always, when you say industry and it's just like one glob together, I think in different companies and different types of games, there's different needs and things like that. So certainly for the narrative department in the game that we were trying to make, we used our audience and game user research, I think, slightly differently than perhaps the industry does.
I think I would like to underline that kind of there is not one industry standard. So if you sort of take an idealized timeline from pre-production, right? We have an idea for a game, or even we have a market that we try to target, to running ops, like we have a live game as a service, or a game that's published and we do follow-up support and bug fixing and DLCs, etc. So if you take the total timeline, then I think what Alex says is that a lot of the game user research happens in those live games, or it right now happens very, very late in the production and development process, where it's very close to something just like bug fixing or more user testing, like does the game work? So it happens relatively late in those stages. But as Leah said, and I found that in other fields as well, right? In principle, you can and arguably should involve players and users all across the timeline. And I've seen in, let's say, back I was in the States when we were working with Hasbro, arguably a board game publisher, and this was about board games. But they did open formative market research around, in that case, the Middle East, and saying, okay, what are kinds of games that we might be able, what are interests of people that can give us inspiration for what kind of games, board games even to develop that might work in that market. So that's kind of a very kind of early pre-production concept development, user research. And particularly if we talk about applied games, so serious games, etc., they're very often also coming out of kind of practices in health and medical research, where this usually runs under labels like patient and public involvement. You, I would say, more frequently find that potential players, potential audiences are involved much earlier in the total pipeline, and also to help you to identify not just kind of how to develop it, but what to develop in the first place.
Yeah, I think that was something in a previous iteration, but it's essentially the same thing. You get people in a room to tell you whether you're doing stuff right. So we thought of it more of sort of human-centered design in a previous life when I worked for a social enterprise that created content for audiences. We would do co-creation workshops. So even before we'd even created the actual product, it was very much every step was taken with the people who are going to be the end users of it, as opposed to, we thought, all right, we've made it, now tell us the degree to which it's right. Everything about the way that it was designed, even with regards to how long the pieces of content were, was based on how much time we understood they had in a day. So understanding them first. So everything about the design, every single element of it was informed by what it was the users needed. And I think that is something that surprised me, particularly in mobile gaming, how there does seem to be a gap in terms of understanding what is your user doing through the day and why do they pick up your game to play it. There's less of an attempt to understand, it feels like there's less of an attempt to understand that, more as Alex was saying before about like, how can I just incrementally increase monetization on this thing, or how can I improve user acquisition by placing this ad there, as opposed to more make the product compelling.
I think
it, you go, Graham.
Oh, sorry, Sebastian. I was going to say that I think one of the main problems the game industry has is that it's not UX mature, so the UX maturity level is incredibly low. What you typically find is companies who are more UX mature, they're aware of all the methods that could be used across the development lifecycle. So they know about what you can do in co-design or pre-production or alpha, beta, or launch, or whatever it may be. But the game industry, many studios aren't aware of all those methods, that what can be done when and why. So they can't just use whatever they hear about. Oh, we've heard about playtesting. Can we do that? Or can we do analytics? So yeah, sure, you could, but you wouldn't do it on its own. That'd be crazy, right? You should be using it as a range of methods across development. But we're not there yet. The game industry is still incredibly mature. Sorry, Sebastian.
No, what I wanted to say is, for me, it's kind of just, it's a very uneven landscape where you can sort of see almost traditions of practice. So depending on which studio you were brought up and where they are, if you want to frame that as a maturity spectrum, or even where they come back. So I would argue that there are, for instance, in the Nordic countries, quite a number of small indie studios who came through serious games degrees or came to game design degrees that were more informed by user experience design, or by educators who themselves have a user experience design background. And as a result, you see them embrace much more participatory design or co-design or UX design practices compared to other companies. Or if you take like social games or network games, like early Zynga and everything that followed, where you say, okay, those were people that were bringing development and user testing practices from the startup world. So, right, let's A/B test everything, and let's always work basically data and analytics first, just in order to see how to improve things incrementally on some kind of conversion funnel. And then that became in casual, in network games, and in now hyper casual games, kind of the default mode, because there was kind of this tradition of practice that lapped over from, in that case, another field. While in commercial AAA publishing or classic console and PC game, in that as the games industry, you have a very different kind of traditions that might then be much closer to just QA and bug testing and do very little of these kinds of early in the process or more sense making or user understanding testing practices.
Yeah, I think.
I think it's worth saying that that there are a couple of developments in the industry which are unlocking this at least, and I think provide opportunities. And that's early access, which is specifically in indie studios, gives you the opportunity to start playing a game before it's really made. And I think that's a big step forward, and I think unlocks a lot of doors in this space. And I think also Kickstarter as well, where that's kind of super early access, and it's being used increasingly, actually not necessarily to raise funds. I mean, raising funds helps, but it'll often be followed by a second round of investment. But to get an audience, to get an early audience, which you can make sure is very engaged, and that so it gives a few openings, and I think a little bit of a bright future for this space.
I think those. Sorry, was someone asking something?
Oh no, I was going to say something, but then I was like, oh, it's going to be a deviation, so.
We'll go Graham first, and then I'm happy for deviations.
I was just going to comment on Alex's point, where totally agree that in some cases early access and things like that can give feedback to developers from early stages. But a few weeks ago, just to not contradict it, but another point of view, I was speaking to an indie studio. They're very small, like five people, who are on early access, but the game isn't performing as well as they would like. And so, yes, they've got feedback because the game's in early access and the data's coming in, things like that. But the problem is the idea just isn't good enough. That's what it seems to be coming down to. And it's completely well, I shouldn't say completely unsalvageable, but it's heading that direction. So it's interesting that early access is great if you want to refine or polish or decide, does the data suggest that feature A is being more used than feature B, or did we get those guesses right? But in this particular case, the idea is just wrong, and so it'll not fix those games like that where they were trying to do something new. I know everyone says that and very few people are doing it, but hey, they were trying something new in this case, and it looks like it hasn't particularly worked.
Yeah, no, I was gonna. Sorry, Nick, did you have another question, or should I
go
just
ahead. Take it away.
Just looking at this panel, it occurs to me that it doesn't look dissimilar to the people that make games who have these new ideas, apart from obviously myself. And it has always amused me, and then sometimes infuriated when it came to other things. The fact that you have this incredibly powerful tool, right? Game user research. My focus was mobile. You have this democratization of the access to games. And so, but never the impetus to be like, well, if one type of person makes games and comes up with the ideas, but it's a global audience that plays them, and actually it's predominantly women that play mobile games. Surely, like, in order to make sure you're creating something that will hit in this area, or even let's say you just wanted to make something new, not necessarily in mobile, but like you wanted to create innovation. One imagined then what you need to do absolutely is go outside of this immature, very insular, very not huge amount of variety in terms of who is within the industry. And yet, and in doing that, like you're sitting on gold, surely, to listen to audiences that are out there that want to play games and could give you really great ideas. And to me, it's so, I just don't understand where the barrier is in terms of being like, all right, if we're not going to let them in to make the games, we're just going to keep hold of the means of production. Let's at least listen to these audiences, because, you know, if nothing else, if we're built on a capitalist society, we like money. These are unmined resources yet that we could go into. That has always been something that, to me, that just confuses me, the way that essentially, to me, what games user research is, you listen to people, listen to the audience. The idea that the industry, sorry, I know we weren't globbing it, but I am, the industry seems to have this aversion to stop and ask for directions or stop and listen is notable.
And where would you say that process goes wrong? Is it that they're not even trying to look for these groups, or the processes that we have for looking for them only turn up the sort of the demographic that you see here and that is overrepresented?
Yeah, I think it's just in the very beginning, in terms of thinking of what's the intent of the game. So I think there's this huge explosion in hyper casual games, for example. So rather than being like, okay, how can we make a women like cats and decorating? What if you're a cat, you decorate? Rather than tweaking that in thousands of different ways, what about being like, okay, if we know that there's this audience who, given 20 to 15 minutes a day and £20 of disposable income a week, will spend it on this mobile game, but that's all they're being offered. What about gathering those people together and being like, what else do you do? What are you not doing when you do this? And how could we get ideas? I think it's just a case of, even before sitting in a room being like, I've got this amazing gameplay mechanic, if it's just, oh, there's an audience out there with a pocket of time and a little bit of money, how can we finesse them out of both? I'd perhaps be more generous than that. Be like, how can we entertain them and provide them value? Yeah, I think that I honestly, I can't answer the question because I don't understand it. To me, it seems so obvious to just see, rather than replicate what's already successful ad nauseum.
So I mean,
maybe, sorry?
I was going to say there's lots of things in there. I'll mention a couple of things.
Yeah, please,
just
go.
For discussion.
I don't know.
So one of the things that springs to mind is one is why do companies not do games user research in general? So when I was running player research, I spoke to 400 game studios a year for pretty much 10 years. So thousands of studios I was speaking to. So a pretty large sample size, trying to figure out why don't they do games user research. And one of the main issues is effort. Like it's one of the main barriers to not doing it. There's lots of barriers, by the way, but I'll just talk about one. But the effort of doing it, like how do we schedule it? Who does it? Who would collect the data? Who would analyze the data? Can we do it in time? Do we have the budget? Do we have the expertise? Like the list of factors that go into that umbrella called effort is so significant that it's just so much easier not to do it. The other side of that, so you have high effort to get in. The other thing is risk. So even if we do that and we do spend the expense and the effort and we go through all this process, like I've had this question asked to me, can you guarantee we will make more money? The words guarantee have come up so many times in calls with developers. If we hire you, can you guarantee we will ... I was like, no, we can guarantee nothing. But let's talk about the chances and where, what's likely to happen, because that's the game you're in. There's no guarantees here, but we can certainly put you on a spectrum of 0% likely to happen to 100, and you can find out what the likely scenario is. So high effort combined with risk, like if we do this new thing, is it likely to give us more money? Or if we just repeat what 1,000 other studios have done but a bit better, could we survive? And that's the practical end of game development, right? It's like, what do we do to survive? What do we do to make money? So I'll stop there and let somebody else give their input into, why don't we have diversity in game ideas, or the people who make them, for that matter.
I think Alex was about to say something.
Yeah, I completely agree with the point here. I think that the problem is that the game user research, what it tends to be within game studios is literally, asking amongst yourselves. Games developers, in the absence of any other kind of direction, will make games that they would enjoy to play for themselves. And as Leah says, you look around a studio and they're all white men, young white men, I should say, as well. And that up to a point that kind of works, but it's clearly a self-reinforcing kind of issue here. I think it's fair to say that most games developers, what they really want is to make games that are loved by a large audience. What they know is what they want, but if you put them on a project which has got a loud and hungry audience that wants to play those games, then most games developers, men or women, will be excited about that, will be enthused by it. It's what drives us to make these games, and that kind of affirmation that yes, these are the right decisions, this is going in the right direction. And it's just a question of kind of making that connection between the two of them. I've got a couple of suggestions for how to go about that, but that we might be a bit early in the process. I wonder if that's going to be a later question, Nick.
We might circle around to that. What I wanna do, make sure. Oh, go ahead. If you go, Nick, but I wanted to say something to both Graham and Alex's points, but you go first. If I go first, I'll we're gonna switch topics a little bit. So
okay, cool.
Wrap up this one.
Yeah, two things. One was the idea of a guarantee and the practical end of game development. Like, can you guarantee our success and whatever? It strikes me that the same people keep getting the money to fail again and again. So the need for guarantees is so bizarre to me, because I'm like, regardless of what you do with this company, you'll have a couple of months to sort of lick your wounds, but the same pot of money that funds game dev studios will give you more money because you have that relationship. Like, it's
So I was going to add quickly. Even crazier, they do the same process again.
Right.
So they fail, and then they do the exact same thing.
Right. And so I'm just like, what? So why not try to, in terms of that effort, you're saying it's a high barrier in terms of effort. All of the things that you listed, it seemed to me that things that Player Research, the company you founded, could do. And there are people that could do all of those things if you were to outsource it. But then in terms of the outcome, the potential there is huge, and if the likelihood is you're going to fail anyway, because most startups do, why not attempt it? It truly baffles me, the fear that a certain demographic have of failure when their mediocrity allows them to succeed constantly is totally baffles me. And secondly, it totally baffles me that the idea of that you're more concerned about the expenditure of effort than you are about the potential of outcome. I can't. But then the other thing, sorry.
You continue, and then.
Then I was going to move on to Alex's point. I'll continue. That there is a desire to make games loved by a large audience. That too, I mean, sure, a large audience, but it seems to me, particularly in games, and I guess in fairness, Graham has highlighted it's an immature industry, but there is one, again, demographic of people whose acclaim and whose uptake is valued higher than others. And so there are many things that's successful in markets that people don't hear about, or in I was talking to someone in the Writers, sorry, I know this is such deviation, I'm so sorry, but I was talking to someone in the Writers Guild, and they were saying on BBC iPlayer, they have to remove kids' programs from the list of like the top, the best performing programs, because if they included children's programming, it would just constantly dominate. That's not where, that's just one example of a demographic that people are like, is maybe less desirable or whatever, but it exists and it is really successful. So there are many other pockets like that where you're like, you could be loved by a large audience, but if it is that you want a large audience that looks like you and that it has the same experience, taste, understanding as you, then yeah, like you'll continue to create the same types of things, because that's the acclaim that you seek. Whereas, and I think there was a question earlier, is why is there not a diversity of ideas? Well, if you have the same people making the same decisions, you'll have the same ideas. Again, it does, sometimes you feel crazy because it seems so obvious that you're like, I must be missing something. I must be missing something because it doesn't seem difficult. But yes, and so continue, Sebastian.
The connection to what you were saying is, for me, a lot of this has to do not with kind of material de-risking or not with effort, but with something like basically which you could call emotional effort or emotional confidence, where, yeah, if you speak my language and if you talk about the things that I like, I feel much more confident that I can understand that. If you talk to me methods that I already know versus methods that are new to me, I feel more confident in them. If you point to a given breakout success, even the fact that it's a breakout success at some point is more due to marketing spend that they were able to do, thanks to the fact that they were successful in the first place, and then just keep shoveling marketing money, particularly in the mobile space, into it, right? So at one point, Gardenscapes is just successful because it keeps being successful and it keeps being able to market itself better than other games. Then, right, all of these are things where I think the difference is not necessarily material effort or material de-risking. It is a sense of, I feel emotionally, personally more comfortable with doing it in the standard way, right? So, and yeah, so acknowledging that kind of emotional or psychological hurdle more than this is about material ones, I think, is also important.
Yeah, certainly. We should probably talk about the ego in design. Like a lot, I can't stress this enough, a lot of designers especially feel somewhat threatened by user research in general. The idea that someone could come in and the data might suggest that their idea isn't working. They just don't want to hear that. They've told me that straight to my face many times. So. And some of these are very famous designers who are very successful, and they know they'll be better if they do it, but they don't want to sit through it. It's very uncomfortable for them, and they just don't want to sit in that room and watch someone struggle with their game. But they would become better designers. They'd have more successful studios, and they know all this, but they still won't do it. As you say, Sebastian, for the trauma, if you like, of going through that informed process of becoming better, deliberate practice, if you will. Here's feedback on your performance. This feedback will make you better.
It just seems bizarre that the progression of an entire industry can be limited by the fragility of a group of people. That the idea that that they're coddling their emotional well-being, and
wasn't it ever thus?
Well, no, I think there are other people who have constantly to put themselves in spaces in which they're constantly uncomfortable, and develop that. I think there was a lady wrote a book called Grit. Develop that sense of grit. It's a requirement for existing, because if one exists in spaces in which one is not is automatically uncomfortable, made to feel uncomfortable consciously or subconsciously. There are people who welcome the opportunity to grow because they have constantly had to do that. There are people who have never had to do that, as I say, are constantly rewarded for the mediocrity. And it's just quite interesting that something so universal as play, as gaming, is held back, is being stunted. Yeah, it's stunted by the stunted emotional growth of a group of people will stunt the growth of an entire industry is quite remarkable. But ho hum, I don't know. I hope I hear that it wasn't ever thus, but my hope is that at a certain point, the lack of sustainability in that it become, it's like if kindergarten gets too small and you stop being rewarded for just existing, you then at some point have to go into primary school and secondary and university and whatever. My hope is that at some point people decide to leave the kindergarten. And but we'll see.
So there's an interesting parallel here with academia, because I think academia is also wrestling with issues of white men in particular being overrepresented in faculty levels, and then studies being conducted on primarily white undergraduate psychology students, female skewed in that case. But there's an equal need, I think, to address this from both sides, and that connects to what I wanted to get in here so that we can frame this wider conversation. We've heard a lot about what games user research is an industry, like how it's positioned at one part of the development cycle when really it should be, interwoven into almost all of it. But those constraints are relieved in academia. What kind of questions is games user research asking and answering in academia instead? And I think that might be a good question for Kieran.
Yeah, so actually I was going to come in on this a second ago. But so it's quite interesting to me, at least, that in academia, we've kind of, a lot of the research I've been involved with, at least, we focused it very much the early conceptualization stage of games, and so that might be the very what kind of themes or what kind of gameplay experiences they want at all, right? With no kind of pre ideas or pre mechanics in mind as a designer. We just kind of ask the end users, and so in some cases, it's like working with people with impaired motor control skills, right? So we're asking them what kind of experiences do they want, and that's used to guide that entire design process. Where obviously that seems like maybe that isn't the case in industry, where obviously the designer maybe has something first. I think that's quite an interesting swap, at least from my perspective. Yeah, we focus so much on what the user wants as a concept and an idea, and then go forward with that rather than coming in already with a concept.
There are two famous designers you probably know who are doing that, or have talked about it publicly. So one is Will Wright, and the other is Sid Meier. So both of those people, who are arguably the two most respected designers in the world, and they've both went publicly and saying, we are now using players to come in to inform the idea, not to validate the idea. So this is like co-creation or co-design, So it's just interesting that these two amazing designers are saying, yep, our ideas are improved by involving players in the process. And yet the majority of the industry was like, well, that's interesting, and completely ignored it. It's like, we know better. So we know better than Will Wright and Sid Meier, So I just wonder why that wasn't more adopted as well. Like, what again, was it the effort? Was there some barrier to more designers, bringing players in? Or as Leah said, did they simply just want to, I've got an idea for a game, let's make it? Yeah. Apologies, that might have been Alex who said that. I can't remember. But yeah, people wanted to make their own game, essentially.
If I can build on Kieran's point, I think there are kind of two variants of game user research. So there's the one that is done as part of researchers making games, and those are then often applied, serious games, etc. And then there is the one where, right, games user research is a field of research, and both of those, or player experience is a field of research, and these kind of have two flavors. So for the we as academics find ourselves making games. We very often find ourselves making games that are serious or applied games because there isn't really an industry market. And then I would say similarly, it's kind of monetary and structural constraints. That means as academics, we get incentivized to put out a proof of concept. This idea might work, and then leave it at that, because then we can publish about it, and that's what we really get incentivized for. And so kind of the taking it through to polishing and marketing and the actual development stretch, that we don't do. And that's why a lot of, I would argue, game user research on the side of academics is we're doing participatory design and co-design, and we develop a concept to the point where we can put it in front of 5 people and write a paper about it. And after that, we're not incentivized to take it any further. So that's kind of the first family. And then there's the second family where games user research is a field of research, and I would say there, the majority of what we do is more kind of general analytic models. Kind of, here are principles for accessibility, or here is a model for how autonomy experiences for players work. So we're doing this kind of studying player experiences and behaviors in order to be scientists and develop generalizable models that we can publish on, but which are then not necessarily immediately practically useful or used. Or we develop methods such as new sets of heuristics or different methods for doing player analysis or player research that are novel as methods, but don't have to live up to the constraints that you might find in production practice. And so therefore there are methods where we say, well, they're new, they're novel, they're interesting, but very often then overscoped in terms of would that ever work in an actual development practice. That's again then a step of testing that we usually don't go through, or a step of refinement where academics rarely go through.
Yeah, I think one of Nick's questions when he said in the panel, I'm just going to try and bring it up here a second. Excuse me while I try and read my email a second. The next question was, what is the primary goals of games user research in industry? And when I read that question, I wrote down, what is the purpose of games user research in academia? Because I agree with what Sebastian, it seems to be it's just to publish a paper. It's not to do anything useful. I mean, that may be a byproduct, but your primary goal, it seems, is to get the paper published and get PhDs out the door and get grant income and the usual things academia makes you do. But the reason I left academia is that, well, that's an interesting paper, interesting book, but I've got a AAA game here I have to work on. And did I use any of those methods? Not really. We didn't. The goal of research and in industry is to answer design problems. So you have to start with a list of design problems that industry actually faces, which is exactly how I did it. I went out and spoke to a lot of studios and said, what problems do you face? And you made the list, you put them in priority order of what you think was most important. You picked the ones you think you could fix. And I started a company to do that. They were informed by academia, I would say, like, you know, but were they the same? Probably not, you know. So my question to the rest of the panel is really, what does games user research in academia, what's your goal? What are you actually trying to achieve by studying this in an academic fashion? Is it just to the papers, or is it to help real games?
I suppose you go one step further back then, don't you? If you ask what's the purpose of your role in academia, whomever it is that you're speaking to. So what I really love about UAL and Central St. Martin's, where I'm doing my PhD, is that it's a practice-led PhD. So and as a university as well, there is this understanding that it has to be practical. It has to be of use to an audience who will be unforgiving in their analysis, but also it has to be, you know, it's harder because you have to be place yourself in the context sort of a continuum of research in academia, but then also you have to prove yourself to people who don't care. It has to be accessible to people who don't care about academia, who aren't insular, who aren't just, you know, in these ivory towers and will pat you on the back for the sake of you doing something. It also has to give that value to them as well. So but yeah, before answering even that question, what's the purpose of game user research, you have to be like, well, why are you in academia? Like, what does it give you that you're not able to get outside, and what do you want to give back? But it's interesting because I was thinking about the opportunity of academia, because one game I really love is Journey, and another one called Sky Children of the Light by this company called That Game Company. And the person who created it, Genova Chen, he created it whilst doing his master's at USC. So it was not something that was funded because a panel of investors understood his idea. He had, ironically, had the same idea that Alex was speaking about before. He wanted something that people could, all of the members of his family could play together. What would that look like? How could you make something that was universal? And then came up with this game that's quite innovative in the way that it uses sound and emotion and all of these kinds of things. But it started in this sort of safe and, well, somewhat safe, but the environment of academia. So I feel like there's a huge opportunity if you're like, okay, I want to create something that is practical. I want to actually do something outside of here that people will actually be able to play, but at the same time use the lack of the idea that you don't need to conform to pre-existing precedents that are flawed. You could create your own way of being because you're in an academic setting, and with the hope that it goes out. I think when people decide on what their PhDs are and what they're going to do and things like that, one could think about game user research and think, how can I integrate that in a way that will inform what I'm trying to do and why I'm here. That said, I think it's completely fair enough if it's like, no, I just want to stay in the ivory tower. I'm going to use game user research for just, theoretically, that's, a thing to do and a way to spend time.
Absolutely. It's just an open question. What is the goal? And there maybe isn't one single goal. It could be multiple. Completely fine.
But I think
Yeah.
but like you said, I think you have to be like radically honest with yourself as to what that is. And if, I wonder that, the studios that you spoke to who couldn't take having to see somebody struggle with their game, honestly, they're like, I want to feel better about what I've made. Cool. We can do that. But just be very honest, because otherwise, maybe that's when you waste time and money and effort and energy, and you get a degree of conflict, is when the truth of what it is that you're trying to do and the thing that you're saying are not the same thing. That's where you get yourself into problems.
And I think that's sort of a situation across academia and industry, or basically every other context, where we very often find ourselves in a situation where we have a personal aspiration. So my aspiration is to make research that's practically useful, that gets actually taken up by people, get used, and they say afterwards, the thing that I made worked better, was liked by more people, etc., thanks to the kinds of tools and methods and concepts that you gave me. So that is my aspiration, but I'm very aware that kind of the economic and social machineries in which we operate, either in industry or in academia, very often are just geared to other things, right? They are geared to monetization in some context. They are geared, in the case of academia, increasingly to monetization by other means, which is grant income, ref income here in the UK. So publish papers because the government pays you for it, and career progression and student income. So to some extent, in either context, it's okay, to what extent can I change something about the structures, or to what extent can I almost hack or exploit or work within the structures to make the structures happy and at the same time deliver on my own aspiration. Where I would argue that similarly in the games industry, there are quite a lot of developers who say, I don't care necessarily about monetization first and foremost, but I work in a company that does. I try to accomplish something different with my design work in the role that I am, to the best extent possible, while still not getting fired because I failed to deliver on some quarterly KPI or OKR or something.
I mean, this is something that I recognize in my own work for sure. That I think if I'm radically honest with myself, my work has really no implications for how someone would go about designing a game. At best, it is about understanding how games affect people, and I think that that's sort of a valuable thing to look at. That wouldn't be, that you can't really justify in industry context. Like you it's not just about how, but like what can we do with this information. Whereas I don't necessarily need to act on it in the same way, but that is something that I think I need to be honest about. These different freedoms and constraints between these two realms. One of the things I wanted to touch on is how they concretely affect the methods that we use. So maybe I'll turn over to Alex first, and if you could just give an example of a recent time that you have used or come into contact with GUR in industry, and what did that actual process look like? How exactly were users involved, and what kind of output did they give you?
So for a recent one, I'm struggling a little bit. I suppose we passively, whilst we're working on the Love Island franchise, were sort of aware of the audience through channels such as Reddit and the like. That was certainly what drew me into the company, to seeing such an engaged audience and kind of different players as well, mostly women, young women who were kind of taking selfies of themselves and their favorite characters and writing fan fiction and that kind of stuff. And that's the kind of thing that really enthuses games developers, I would say. I know that Obviously, in games like Subnautica, they had deeply integrated their QA process into the audience. So within the game, it was very easy to kind of give feedback on failures and areas like that. But again, really late in the process. I've been part of user testing on console games in the past as well, where we reach out to kind of audience of who we think they look like. But I think very late in the process. I kind of hinted that I had a couple of suggestions for how they ought to be going about it, and I think I'll touch on those briefly because I think they're kind of interesting. So, and this is specifically for researchers at iGGi, I think. It was mentioned before that it's quite hard to go through this process of asking the audience, formulating sensible questions or approaches, talking aloud as they're playing the game, or retrospectives, these kind of approaches. So, I mean, one simple way is to actually approach games companies and say, we will do this. We will go and ask these questions of your audience, tell you what they are thinking. You can sort of do with that what you wish, but the only thing that you would ask in return is to be able to publish not necessarily the results of the questions that were asked, but the processes that you went through. So just demonstrate it to them, to the games companies, and I think that might be one way of kind of maybe opening doors and changing things. But the other one I just wanted to touch on is that the kind of talk aloud measurement is sort of has come to the games industry a little bit in social media streamers. So there is a lot of people now playing games and talking about them as they play it with audience participation. So people typing in the channels and what have you. And I think actually if you were to give kind of guidelines to a streamer that was kind of engaged with the games that you were kind of exploring, you may be able to get them to lead a process which would be beneficial to both parties. And that could be really helpful, I think, especially in maybe early access games, or when people are thinking about, as Bossa does, for instance, they have a kind of games creators club where they make just really very, very rapid game jam games and then push them out to an audience to try and get feedback from the audience. I think that might be an interesting space to explore as well.
Nick, sorry, could you repeat your question?
Not coming through to me.
You're muted, Nick.
Okay. Because I don't know. I mean, there's a question on the chat from Francesca. Are there any tools, in your opinion, that are useful but under-considered from the industry for time, money reasons? Alex's answer seemed to be answering that one. So, if you don't mind, I would just say, off the back of that, one thing that was difficult for us, I think, was there was ways in which we could gather qualitative data, but in terms of creating unbiased insights, that was something that we weren't. It just wasn't our skill set, and even actually in designing the qual questions, sometimes being too close to the product would mean that is not necessarily something you're skilled at. We had a really talented quant team, one of whom is here today. He's awesome. I think two things is, one is finding ways in which quantitative and qualitative data can work well together, but also in terms of, once you've got the data, parsing it in a way that is useful and unbiased and informative in a way that's actionable. If anyone cracks those skills or somehow has that as part of what they're doing in academia, that's something that's super useful, and I think is quite under. I don't know that it's under considered, but I don't. Yeah, actually, maybe I'll say it's under considered, because I think people don't realize how useful it is to get really quality level of insights. from a stack of data, regardless of if it's quant or qual.
If I can connect that to basically Graham's earlier point, as in, well, when I shifted to games industry, I was starting with the design problems that people have. So I very much agree. Yes, developing insights from data is hard and a super valuable skill. But the kind of insights from data, again, that we train people in academia to build is make us a diagram with boxes and arrows that explains to us what happens in a person's head. That's usually the kind of insight that we train people to generate. While the kind of insight that in a design project is valuable is, what does this data mean in terms of the design options that we have, or in terms of the problem or the decision that we face? So I would say, insight generation or synthesis is super valuable, but sometimes that's kind of, again, the kind of synthesis we teach in academia very often is slightly adjacent to the kind of synthesis that you want. Just as a plug here, if people are interested, there's just one presentation out there. I'll put it in the chat by Steve Portugal, user researcher, written a great book about doing user interviews, etc. And he has a wonderful presentation and talk with Firefox and other people out there called "We've Done All This Research, Now What?", which I found is a very useful, nice, gentle intro in how do you turn qualitative data or something else into design considerations, where he literally walks you through the process. So that's my plug. My plug for the day.
I've just noticed the questions up the side. Somebody was asking about, any tools that are under considered. I wouldn't say. I'm going to answer the question indirectly. It's not really under considered, but if I think game studios should do one thing, it's just start earlier in the process and do even basic usability testing. You don't need to do it to a very high level, whatever that means, but it should be good enough. So don't think of it in terms of increasing the quality of your research sometimes, but increasing the quantity. Like doing one usability test is not enough, or doing one heuristic review or one UX playtest. So do more during the making of the game. Don't just collect analytics once it's launched. It's often too late for many studios. You could be dead by that point. So you want to inform the design as early as possible. And frequency is your friend, frequency and cadence. How soon can we start? How often can we do it? I would definitely trade off quality for quantity. But again, I'm not talking about do something terrible. Obviously, there's a minimum here. But usability testing of 5 or 6 users on a fortnightly basis, if you could do that compared to some one great bit of research that happens near the end, I'll take the quantity every time. Just one quick figure that may get conversation sparking is there are about 3,000 game studios in the UK, roughly, from 2-person teams up to our biggest studio, like 500, 600 people. Of those 3,000 studios, if I was to make a guess at how many I think do good enough user research, I would say it's probably 0.5%. So maybe, and I'm being generous. Like I'm thinking maybe 15 studios I could name, maybe, but I'd struggle. There are certainly ones who do, we did a play test once, or we go and spoke to some people and they said they like pink, so we're gonna do that now, but next week it's gonna be green, and blue the week after that. So I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about a good enough campaign of user research. I reckon about 0.5% of the game industry, and you can extrapolate that worldwide. I think the figure would pretty much hold. So again, if you want to make it, if I want to make a difference, the things I think about, what about the other 99.5% who are doing either terrible research or not enough? It's the same thing. It's still terrible. Whatever way you look at it, it's not good enough. So the game industry for me is failing in terms of user research because very few people are doing it. And the rest who are trying it, I mean, good for them. That's awesome. They're trying it. But they may even be hindering themselves, thinking that we're doing this research and we're going to try and act on it, but the research is incomplete or not good enough or whatever it may be. So that's just it's not one of Nick's questions, but it's just a figure for my internal picture of user research in the game industry is we're way off where it should be. We have there's a lot that could be done. And back to that question around the tools, you don't need more tools. We already know the basics. I just want you to do the basics because I think that'll help you massively. that'll take you from 0 to like at least 30, 40, 50%, whatever number you want to put on it. I'm not worried about going from 95 to 100. I want to get you off the ground. I want to get these studios going in a good enough way. So I'll stop there, but it's just a figure around. What about the rest of the industry? We're not doing enough. They're not doing. These games could be so much better, which could lead into more creative ideas, by the way. Okay.
So just to underline that and then connect it to Nick's question, sort of what are the practical differences in how sort of constraints affect academic user research versus industry? So my biggest eye-opening moment was when I was working recently with a small SME here in the UK on a new virtual reality game. And I was just doing some of the user research. And I've been teaching from day one my students and doing play-centric design, so to say, right? So play testing is an essential part of your development cycle. Every cycle on a weekly or bi-weekly cadence has a play testing as a core part of it. And that was news. That was news to the studio, which already had put out lots of games there. And that was just so, that was so eye-popping to me that not even that low bar had apparently reached quite established studios in the UK. So that's a data point to support your argument. But to connect that to Nick, I would say, if I do games user research in a practical context, it's for me the practical and what kind of design decisions do I have to make or do I have to support? And then what is good enough in order to make a confident advice for that. And with that company, in that case, it was literally just, what's the sequence in which we reveal puzzles? Is this particular grasping interaction in VR understandable to a user or not? And for that, it was enough to get 3 to 5 people into a room. It was even enough to get 2 people into a room, honestly, in order to say, no, this is not understandable, or this puzzle sequence is wrong, and here's what you should do different. So all of that is at a really, right, compared to academic standards, really, really very low bar, but it is good enough evidence in order to confidently change design. That's all we need to, that's the bar we need to pass. While in academic research, the bar right now that we need to pass is a standard of rigor that convinces external peer reviewers that there is no imaginable counter-argument to the claims that you base on your data. So in your language, you hedge everything and you always use maybe, could, or might, and we pre-register and we use hundreds of participants in order to establish a very, very basic fact. It's great that we established that basic fact against beyond reasonable doubt or couched it in enough reasonable doubt, but that's kind of right, because our practicalities is, does it get accepted in peer review? Then how we do the research just looks radically different.
Yeah, one of Nick's questions was, what is academia good for, basically? How did it benefit you? And back to your point, Sebastian, I think how academia, over the 20 years I spent in academia, I think how it benefited me was it showed me what good looks like. To get it through peer review, I now know what good good research looks like. So I think I know where I can make sacrifices to help a games company on a practical level. And that's good to have that confidence and say, yep, I'm familiar with all the methods and all the textbooks. I can do all that stuff. Done it for years. Here's a bunch of papers being published. But then starting a games research studio and doing that on, hundreds of games, whatever, across the years, I think I felt confident knowing where I could make the sacrifices. So for me, that's what academia was good at. That training allowed me to say, that is a compromise too far. I would never do that on your game, and here is why. But I would do this, and I think that will help you today. So that's what academia, I think, really helped. Somebody is squeaking outside. I might go and close the window.
Still not hearing you.
I'm curious, actually, from the panel. One of the questions in the chat, I imagine we have to finish quite soon, but that Prasad had was, what are your thoughts, projections on the use of co-design-based research for games in the near future? My immediate feeling is that I think people previously probably thought co-design and then thought, okay, physically one needs to be in a space with a group of people. That's already sounds expensive and difficult in terms of logistics. But with people being more comfortable with using GatherTown and Zoom and whatnot, I wonder that people will lean more into co-design before because the barriers have fallen. But I'm wondering what the rest of the panel think on that, because I am curious. What are your thoughts, projections about the use of co-design based research for games in the near future?
I've got one observation, which is that a very successful co-design space at the moment is Roblox. In fact, lots of people making new and innovative games in Roblox. They all happen to be a lot younger than me, but I think that's an interesting kind of way forwards. Actually, is to kind of to try and work within a games design, maybe a sort of super trivial games design set of tools. You know, maybe it's an extension to GatherTown or something, which has got cards and physical spaces and things like that, but allows people to think in design terms dynamically. That would be quite cool.
I recommend the combination of Zoom and tools like Playing Cards.io, which is for me the most lightweight if it's about core game mechanics that are in a board or a card game, but you might use in lots of digital games. That one is really so super light. You hit one button and then you're in the edit mode. You hit another button, you're back in the play mode. So as tools, it's there. In the near future, again, I don't dare speak about the entertainment games industry. Again, my perception is in applied and serious games, this is more common and will be getting more and more common, particularly as the kinds of funders in that space, which are then very often government funders or NGOs or similarly bodies, already have participation as part of their policy, as part of their values, or even as part of National Institutes of Health Research, etc., where they just said, no, user involvement is good practice, and if we want to fund you, we want to see that you do user involvement. So in the applied game space, I think there is already some uptake, and there will be much more uptake in the near future.
Yeah, just to come in and kind of, I guess, echo Sebastian's thoughts there. I think that's very much the case for a lot of there's lots of user-centric design already happening in kind of games academia, but I think, yeah, we're going to see this continue to happen as we look into more like specific use cases of where we can use games in applied manners. And so, yeah, I think in academia we're going to see it everywhere for a while. But yeah, I can't really speak for industry.
I'm not.
Oh, you can actually hear me now. I'm so
Yeah.
I'm so sorry, everybody. Yeah, I've lost now the chats when I tried to restart Gather. So I don't know what Ben's question is, but Graham, if you want to field it, feel free to read that one out and take it.
Oh no, Ben was asking that maybe it's me, I'm not sure, painting a fairly depressing picture of how user research is used in industry. And it's true, it is a pretty depressing picture, which is why 10 years ago, I started a company to try and fix that problem. But if there is a bright spot, I think in the last 2 or 3 years in particular, it's the area of accessibility, which comes under games user research. So accessibility has been talked about for at least 10 years, and it's had some conference, and developers didn't really take a lot of notice. But in the last 3 or 5 years, there's hardly a week goes by where we see an article in the games press about how accessibility is being used, where they're bringing diverse range of audiences in with different range of impairments to try and inform the game design. So that's a particular standout, I think, in the last few years where user research has had had a fairly significant impact.
I would just say, Ben, that apparently my daughter's learning Mandarin, but I have not yet. But the word for crisis is the same as the word for opportunity, apparently. And I think that's relevant here. Because much as you've probably seen, I have feelings, thoughts, and opinions about the industry. I am aware that it is immature. It has got so much space to grow, and particularly with regards to how it is users are engaged with and asked and listened to and whatnot. There is so much opportunity. So I would say the bright spots are probably coming from the seats that are looking at us, your lights, your ideas, people who recognize that there is something to be done and then decide to do it. I think there's a lot of opportunity. It's going back to sort of emotional resilience, or the idea of being able to take on the idea of critique as something that is constructive. This panel should, I hope, make people think, oh wow, there's loads of spots that I can do some work. It's like falling off a log and I'll do better than most. So yeah, I think it's not, this isn't, I hope it wasn't depressing. I hope it's making people feel like there's lots to be done, and with a slight change of mindset and a bit more of a sense of resilience, as there's lots you can do.
Yeah, completely agree. It's a low bar for success here. It's just waiting for somebody to come in and really demonstrate.
Yeah.
It's on the floor.
I think there are so two quick things to that. So I think the one thing to that for me is I come out of standard software development and user experience design. That was my entry road into games and play. And there, yes, I think there is a ton of low-hanging fruit, and maybe the games industry just needs, similarly to what has been happening in accessibility, something like Steve Krug's Rocket Surgery Made Easy, or Don't Make Me Think, which is basically a funny, super accessible, for dummies guide why usability testing matters and how to do it. That I think just, I don't know, reached the C-suite, reached lots of developers, and I think did kind of lots of work to actually just popularize it as, yeah, that's of course the logical and sane thing to do, just with the basics like playtesting. So I think maybe we just need that. And then kind of my other, so that's an opportunity here, folks. If you can write beautifully illustrated, slightly funny tongue-in-cheek books that are 100 pages long and explain the basics of playtesting, you have a market. The other one is, I think there are generations coming up through different game design degrees who kind of, thanks to their teaching, not to toot our own horns as academics, but who, thanks to teaching, have accepted games user research as the common way of doing things. Play-centric design with playtesting as this is just the way how you do it, which then have become, or now founding, different kind of indie studios where you then find also that they're organized economically differently. And that gives me hope that just with age and time, that shifts the total mind space, the total overtone window in the total industry, as in what is normal and common as accepted. The risk towards that is that for indie studios, obviously the situation is highly economically precarious. We don't have a good financial model to make living as an indie studio right now a reliable career choice. Sort of, if somebody figures that out, then I think, thanks to the indie games revolution and the kind of formative years that lots of indie studios have undergone, we might similarly see a broader sea change. So if somebody has a new economic model, please do share.
Yeah, that's definitely the problem. I'm not sure if people have Googled this, but the average indie game on Steam, so PC-based, costs about $100,000 to make. But I can't remember the exact figure, but the amount we make it back is not good. So the economic model of making games is in a dire situation. If you thought it was pessimistic looking at user research in games, look at the economy of the game industry. Not the 1% at the top, that's incredibly healthy, but the rest of the indies who are trying to get into the industry and working in smaller teams. There's lots of articles out there, where people are sharing their figures, how much it costs to make, how many years of their life, how much they got back. So sadly, we can't ignore the economic side, as Sebastian says, because that relates to what research can you do. They may have the willingness to do it. We want to do it. But how can we possibly afford this when we can't even afford to pay someone to put sound in the game? If it comes down to that choice, for a lot of indies, they'll put the sound in the game. They won't go and do a focus group. So all of these things, sadly, are related. It's quite a complex problem. It gets easier if you're richer. A little.
We're moving into the last 10 minutes of our panel. One of the things that struck me from this crisis and opportunity being the same word thing is there are a lot of students in the audience today, some of whom may be interested in pursuing a GUR career. From Graham's statistic, it looks like there are about 15 companies out of 3,000 in the UK where such a position might actually exist. So what kind of burden does that place on early career people to sort of create their own position, and do you have any advice for how someone would go about doing that?
Oh my goodness. Yeah, you're right. I mean, when I launched Player Research in 2012, it was pretty much Sony PlayStation in London or us. I think that was it in the UK. If you wanted a job in user research, somebody can maybe correct me, but no one else is springing to mind. There are a few more now. You've got Warner Brothers or Rocksteady, also in London. Honestly, it's really, really low. There are some consultants. So this is going to be tough to break into if you genuinely want the job. There are more now. You have Creative Assembly, possibly Jagex over in Cambridge, Rockstar, possibly up in Edinburgh. So honestly, if I wanted a job in this field, I think I'd be writing a letter pleading the case to maybe studios who don't have it but could benefit from it, which is pretty much all of them, by the way. But that probably will be an uphill struggle, I'm sorry to say. It sadly is difficult to break into this field if you want to do... By the way, when I say user research, I'm mostly thinking qualitative, so running play tests and things. If you're on the data science side, I think your job is a lot easier because anybody who makes a free-to-play game will probably want to hire you as a data scientist. But if you're on the other side, the human side, let's say, it's going to be an uphill struggle. Sorry, but don't have better news on that front.
Sorry, I'm like the Pollyanna to Graham's Eeyore. But I wonder that, like, if you've got 3,000 minus 15 companies to plead a case to, there's still, still a chance.
Yeah, there's always a chance.
I think also going crabwise from that data scientist route is not a bad way. If your goal is to get into the games industry and practice this craft, then potentially just fleshing out your CV so that you can also cover off the data science. I imagine that that will serve you well anyway in this field. Being able to really rigorously analyze your own data. So.
That sounds, I can sort of see a couple different potentially useful pairings. Back at the beginning of the conversation, we were talking about the narrow scope GUR that people think of is probably could be expanded. And so like participatory design, co-design kind of things that may traditionally be seen as a different job, but maybe for a smaller studio, if you're trying to sort of create your own position where you're saying, I can be useful in these ways, having that in your toolkit and more traditional GUR in your toolkits, potentially some of the data science stuff in your toolkits might help you cobble something together.
It's also worth saying, partly the point of iGGi or iGGi is not to get you into the games industry, but it's to help you push the games industry. The games industry is in many ways very broken, and if a good student project can come and demonstrate that there are better ways of doing these things, then go for it, push for it, make it happen, because I think it can. There are doors that they're not exactly open doors, but you can kick them open if you try hard enough.
Yeah, I agree with the kicking open. Definitely give it a go. Back to Leah's point, there's a chance. Absolutely, there's a chance. There's a large market. My thought was, could iGGi do with an incubator? Can we start our own?
Yeah.
So, I think if you're looking for finding an industry job right out of the bat, then to say, either kind of go for an analytics job, of which there are more, and then say, hey, here are the other things that I do that are also valuable. Should we embrace them? Or look for a large company that has embraced that, which means you probably need to kind of cast your net in terms of where you want to apply beyond the UK in order to look at the global games market. Because then there are just sort of larger companies who therefore likely are more mature and therefore have more dedicated game user research positions. If you want to make it as something like a consultant, then it would be, I think, just advisable, if there is any way with any company you can create a success story. Here's what we did. We did this participatory design thing with this game for kids, and here's how it totally rocked. And then you basically do the conference circuit with that. And then have a way to say, and yeah, by the way, here is an easy, very low cost, test the waters way to try this out at your company, whether it also works. That as a consultant might be then a way in the door with certain companies, and that way build up your portfolio. So
yeah, and I guess, sorry.
Well, I'll go quickly. It's also worth saying there's loads of people in the industry who, they're basically coding for food. They're not being paid a lot. So if you find somebody in the industry and you say, look, hey, I'm ready to come alongside for just, I don't know, a piece of the action or something like that, and I can survive on beans for 3 months, then maybe you can also you can take the long hard route, as I think Graham has already pointed out. It's likely to end in disappointment, but it might flesh out your CV and test out some of your theories at least.
Yeah, just to build on that, there's a wealth of opportunities of kind of finding indies that are midway through development or even in early stages. Go browse games on itch.io and stuff like that, and reach out to them, speak to them, see if they're happy for you to run some studies on their games. Most indies are probably going to say yes. Obviously, there's not going to be any money in that, but at least it can flesh out your CV and hopefully something you enjoy doing.
And that's where you could use the fact that you're already in academia as a framework, as a way to make sure that you have a degree of rigor. If you do it as part of something you're already doing, and you I don't know, give yourself milestones or a way of working that will, by virtue of how you've designed it, create a case study, create something that you can then go around the conference circuit, as Sebastian was saying. If you start before you leave university to thinking in that way, maybe those two things can dovetail, rather than once you leave then you're like, okay, let me start. Because I think there's a lot of doors open when you are sending it from a university address, request from a university address, and saying you're doing it as part of your research. So yeah, I guess it's a case of thinking strategically about your career and what it is that you want to achieve, but also understanding. I think certainly my presence on this panel and in this industry is a case of it was never, fall out of university and then woohoo, got a job. Like, you do, regardless of what it is that you're going to do. Yes, if your passion and your dream is user research, it will be harder. But I don't know that there's any title that's easy. But if you can think strategically, if you have a very clear idea of what it is that you want to achieve, but you're willing to take on information and adjust for that as well, then yeah, there's lots of opportunity.
And I should say that that's exactly how I started my company. I was an academic at the time at Sussex Uni, and I thought all these game studios could benefit from user research. So I started emailing them. And I didn't exactly say, your game's rubbish, I think you can do better. It was more, hey, I do this thing, I'm an academic in human-computer interaction. I think it'll benefit your game. And I was very specific. I said, here's the things I think it would help you with. Because I was reading game reviews, I knew what players were complaining about. So I was targeting these emails saying, you've released this game, it's fallen short in these areas. My specialty in academia is designed to remove these. Would you be interested? So I would be getting meetings and just go around, and I was relentless. I can't even remember how many people I spoke to. Very large numbers. And I had the door shut in my face a lot. I can't stress this enough, a lot. I also took advice from industry, user research outside of the games industry. And everyone told me, do not start a company in this area, you will fail. That was the unanimous advice. Do not start a company. So I started a company. So yes, it may be bleak, but I've been in this position where I was told, do not do it, you will fail. Games companies telling me, that's interesting, please leave. I was escorted off the building in one case. That's a story for another time. So yes, I've had it all, the rejections. But we ended up working for pretty much every a lot of game studios worldwide. The studio was acquired. We had 13 games on the front page of the Apple Store one year. We'd worked on, it did lead to all of that stuff. So it can be done. And if you want it, you can, it's there. So.
Also don't underestimate like relationships that you make. in doing that. Don't ever go into things being very transactional, that you need something to happen. Sorry, I don't know if I'm. Is it?
Yeah.
Okay.
You're fine. Go ahead.
I hear feedback. Yeah, don't underestimate the ability to create relationships by these things. Don't make it transactional, that you need to get a job, you need to get a contract or a get something physical and tangible. Sometimes that conversation with somebody that you vibe with, you have no idea how that's going to pay off in 5 years' time. Particularly in this country where the industry is pretty much like a little puddle. Yeah, everything is building, basically, as long as you approach it that way, that everything is formative.
That is all our time for today. It's a shred of optimism to end on. Thanks so much, everybody, for coming. Thanks especially to the panelists. I really enjoyed it. I don't know who is going to be able to stick around for chats or questions or something, but if people want to sort of approach me and I can approach the panelists, if they're happy to share their email or whatever, please do get in touch. And yeah, I really enjoyed it. Thanks again.
Cheers. Thanks very much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.